I'm so excited to be here tonight, and I want to thank you all for joining us for a special and I want to say timely opportunity to hear from a local South Asian trans activist. The core committee and I are excited to welcome Feroza Syed as a speaker in the core lecture series focused on inclusivity. Feroza will share some highlights of her extensive advocacy experience supporting trans and LGBTQ communities in Georgia and the nation. So, thank you, Feroza. Welcome.
Thank you guys for having me. I'd like to thank Oglethorpe University, Layla, the whole core team for reaching out. It's always amazing when I have an opportunity to speak to college students and college staff. My name is Feroza Syed, and I, as Layla just mentioned, am very much a woman, brown, daughter of Indian immigrants, Muslim, and a trans woman. I live here locally in the Atlanta area, have been here most of my life, roughly since the first grade. I'm going to go ahead and start off today. I have a little presentation that I'll go through a little bit later, but I'm going to start off by just telling you a little bit more about my story, how I came into activism and advocacy. That way you guys know a little bit more about me. Go throughout some of the reasons why we need advocacy and activism in trans spaces, a little bit about my political advocacy and activism as well. And then at the end, I would like to leave it open for some questions if we have enough time. So if you guys have any questions, put them in the chat and Layla and Sarah can be looking at those and then let me know at the end if you guys can do that for me. So I'm going to start off with some of my earliest childhood memories. When I was in India for my Bismillah, which is Islamic celebration when children recite a verse from the Quran. I was about 4 years old, 4 months old, 4 days old. That's kind of the tradition when we read from the Quran in my particular denomination of Islam. And we were in an open courtyard in India. And I remember my cousin, Sada, who's like 30 days older than me, very, very similar in age, grabbing her mom's dupatta, which is like a long piece of fabric that Indian women use to cover their hair or wrap around their necks, and wrapping around herself like a sari. And she was sweeping the courtyard. So I, of course, grabbed my mom's dupatta and did the same thing. But at the time, I was still a boy, at least presenting as a boy. And all I remember my mom screaming was, no, you can't do that here. I think what that statement really said to me at that age was that she had already seen some of my behaviors, what they were, and kind of acknowledged that in that statement, right? You can't do that here, as in she had already seen it happening. The fact that me being myself or presenting as who I felt I was at the time was a negative, and that I shouldn't do it. And it kind of led me down the journey of my life, which was, negativity surrounding my identity, constantly feeling afraid of who I was. I knew very early on in elementary school to kind of hide, who I was as a person, how I felt. By the time I was almost 14 years old, I think I tried to commit suicide about 4 times, at which point actually came out to my family, because the trauma of hiding who I was as a person it just didn't make sense anymore as far as for me to continue to try to be here. It was either be who I am truly, authentically, as myself, or just not be here at all. Anyways, I came out to my mom and on one of those attempts, right after one of those attempts, and she did the whole typical Indian thing, right? Oh my God, beta, we're going to fix you, blah, 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 which is not how you want to react when somebody comes out as TGNC or LGBTQ. There's really no fixing involved. It's just kind of acknowledging who the person is, allowing them to be who they are, and loving them. I went to therapy for a little bit in my early life and was lucky and blessed enough to find a gender dysphoria specialist. So rather than somebody telling me I shouldn't be who I am, this particular specialist was giving me confirmation that I'm not alone, that the condition, quote unquote, that I had was something that was fairly common. And you guys have to remember, you kids are all in the days of cell phones and internet and computers. When we were growing up, we had to dial into the internet. It actually literally made a noise. I think Sarah, Linda, maybe Layla can nod their heads yes. It used to make a whole dial tone. It was kind of crazy. So we didn't really have the accessibility to a wide array of information like we do now. Not that that makes it any easier for trans kids today, but there is some solidarity and there is some ability to find other TGNC folks. And that was the biggest thing for me, was I just thought I was alone. After going to see this therapist, my mom and dad kind of understood what was going on, but really denied it. I presented as a male still. Presenting means wearing male clothes, if that makes sense. So if everybody's not familiar with the terminology, gender identity versus, sexual orientation is who you go to bed as versus who you sleep with. So that's sexual orientation, versus gender identity is who you go to bed as, right? And then in gender identity, the presentation is how you're presenting at that moment. Because there's a lot of people that are gender fluid or non-binary and maybe presenting male for the day, presenting female for the day. So it's a interesting situation, but that's what presenting means. I presented as a boy until the end of high school because my parents made me. They would not allow me to transition. Go figure, coming from a Muslim immigrant family from India. At 19, my freshman year in college, I transitioned. I went to Georgia State University and quickly thereafter had passing privilege, which means that I passed as a cisgendered woman, which means passing privilege is when you can move into the gender that you've transitioned into and no one knows that you transitioned into that gender. And if anybody has questions or anything throughout, please put them in the chat and let me know if you need me to stop and kind of focus in on an area. After transitioning and moving, like I said, quickly into a space where I had passing privilege, I grew my career and started, I finished up college, got into corporate America. Through those years, though, I experienced a bunch of different things that made me very apprehensive about being an out trans woman. I was sexually assaulted. I have been thrown down a stairwell, choked out, spit on, you name it, for disclosing to mostly men, have been the ones who've been violent at times of my disclosures. Once they're attracted to me, telling them that I'm a trans woman was generally the cause of the anger and frustration. I also was turned away by the majority of my family. I have about 45 members of my extended family in the Atlanta area who still don't talk to me. And I'm almost 40 now. So it's kind of crazy that to this day, a lot of my family still can't really come to terms with the fact that I am a woman and was born a woman and just can't come to terms with where I'm at in my life. Long story short, I got married, I moved on, I built a whole successful career, not out as a trans woman. I'm a multi-million-dollar producing associate broker with Atlanta Fine Home Sotheby's International Realty. And as we kind of headed into 2016 is when things really started changing for me. Regardless of how you maybe feel about the previous administration, and not to be political, I think that we can all agree that there were certain things that were happening, whether it was, the Muslim bans, the trans ban, things going on with LGBTQ rights, that whether you thought so or not, were definitely negatively affecting certain marginalized communities. Coming into 2016, I had already been a little unhappy in my marriage. I didn't know what was going on, but I realized that as I was going out or I was talking or even doing political advocacy, I often would talk about my Muslim identity. I would talk about being a woman. I would talk about being brown. But whenever it came to being an out trans woman, I was hid that identity from everybody. And the reason why I did that was because of the experiences I had when I was younger, I think my family turning away from me, fear of losing my job, fear of losing everything that I had worked for. At that point, I had been in real estate for 9-10 years, and the vast majority of my clients were heterosexual straight people. I had not really, I didn't build a career around being LGBTQ or anything, right? So it was very scary because it never felt like it was the right time to come out. And I have a question. Does religion, Christianity, Islam make it harder for people to accept you as who you truly are, as opposed to who God made you as? I think that every monotheistic religion has their own issues with TGNC and LGBTQ people. But what I have found in most religions now is that there are very progressive factions that teach a different version of those religions. So if you happen to be Muslim, you can look up Muslims for progressive values. I know that in, Protestant Christianity, I believe it's the Methodist group that is a little bit more progressive. I can also connect you with some local pastors who are either LGBTQ or TGNC themselves. So if you guys have any questions or you reach out to Layla at the end, I'll be glad to share any resources. That being said, I decided in February of 2018 to come out. Now, when we talk about passing privilege, I want to kind of clarify. I had been married at this point or with my ex-husband for almost 13 years, and even my in-laws didn't know. So, I mean, when we talk about passing privilege, I'm about 5'4.5", and nobody in my extended in-laws family or my actual mother-in-law or father-in-law knew that I was a trans woman. So coming out was a really big deal to me because I had been lying to them for almost 13 years. And the last 7 years of our marriage, they wanted kids. So I kept saying that I had early onset menopause. So on February 1st of 2018, I met my mother-in-law in a it was either Longhorn or Outback Steakhouse in Dublin, Georgia, right? And told her what was going on. And she gave me a big hug, super, super accepting, super amazing, and told me, I should have never hid it from her. And she was very, positive about it. Prior to that, I had built up my strength by telling a couple people at work. I told my dental hygienist, and it was a really amazing experience. Everybody was very, very positive. That being said, when I was on my way home, I decided that I was going to make a Facebook post with a letter that I had written to my mother-in-law, which is kind of what launched me into my activism and advocacy. It went semi-viral, ended up getting something like 75,000 likes and shares, got picked up by Pantsuit Nation and some other organizations, and kind of put me into a spotlight that I had never been in. I got another question. Do you think gender identity and or sexuality should be one's salient identity? I'm thinking about queer people who don't feel the need to come out anymore. No, I don't think that it should be anyone's salient identity. As a Muslim woman, as a brown woman, daughter of Indian immigrants, I have so many different identities, and it's so frustrating sometimes when people only focus in on that TGNC identity or only want to talk to me about one of my particular identities. I think as humans, all the different identities and intersectionality we have is what makes us absolutely beautiful people. Thank you, May. So I came out on a viral Facebook post, and from there it kind of went crazy. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution picked up my post and wrote an article on me. And then it was another article, and then another magazine, and I got to be on covers of magazines. I got to do all sorts of different things that I had never done ever in my past. Started speaking in local colleges, talking about my story, talking about all the different intersectionality I have, and finally got to a point where in 2018, I was Aid Atlanta Ambassador. And then in 2019, I ended up being Grand Marshal for Pride with Stacey Abrams and Chanel Haley and several other amazing local activists. And that's kind of what pushed me into these spaces. I'm going to share my screen now and tell you a little bit more about some of the activism and advocacy. So let's talk about why we need activism and advocacy in the trans community to begin with. There's a multitude of reasons, and we could spend all day literally just on this one section of the presentation, but violence, as you guys may know, TGNC folks, more specifically Black trans women, are the most likely to be murdered and have violence against them. Homelessness and healthcare disparities are also major issues in our community. Locally, we did a survey in my work on the mayor's board, And we found that employment and homelessness were the top two issues that Atlanta trans and TGNC folks were having issues with, which was a crazy thing for me. For us as an organization working on the LGBTQ Advisory Board, it was very jarring to see how many people in our community needed help in those two sections of their life. When we're talking about violence and murder, the numbers have been going up steadily. When we talk about transphobia, again, I don't want to be political here, but the last 4 years have been severely transphobic under the past administration. When you look at the transphobia that's coming in political circles and from the top down, you can see the numbers that I'm sharing here. It went from 22 to 25 to 44 plus people in 2020 that were murdered. When you think about 2020, one of the things that we have to point out is half the year, half the country was in quarantine. And yet we found a way of murdering, more people in that particular year than we have ever done in recorded history for TGNC folks in community. So it's really, really frightening to think about the road we're headed down. And just because the previous administration has lost and pulled out does not mean that transphobia is gone all of a sudden. It will probably be prevalent for the next 5 to 10 years, almost a decade. And when we're talking about advocacy and activism, this is why so many TGNC women or TGNC folk in general are out doing this work right now, because we're trying to counteract the last 4 years that we've had in the previous administration. And some of the stats that I got here today are from the Human Rights Campaign's annual report. If you guys are interested, you can always go look up HRC, and they actually have a really amazing trans report that they did in 2018. It's about 70 pages long or something. It has really great statistics. So if you're looking for where I've pulled some of the info from, you guys can go there and check it out. Homelessness, as you guys can read here, transgender people face disproportionate rates of homelessness. 1 in 3 TGNC people report living in poverty. Additionally, 41% of Black trans folks have reported being unhoused at least one time in their life. This is something that's near and dear to my heart. And when we're talking about advocacy a little bit later in some of the organizations I sit on, I work for Trans Housing Coalition, which is currently doing some amazing work in this sector. Healthcare disparity. 1 in 4 TGNC people have avoided healthcare providers out of fear that they're going to be mistreated. I'm going to stop there for a second and tell you guys a personal story. In my earlier comments, I was telling you about how I had been choked out. What happened to me the night of that incident was that I was in a bar working. If you guys remember, or if you guys know of, like Jaeger girls or Miller girls, or the girls who kind of sell alcohol or will offer you a shot in a bar when you go out. I used to be one of those girls, and I used to work for Jägermeister. And we were at a bar at the time. I had a boyfriend, very happily in a relationship, and a guy hit on me in front of about 6 or 7 other guys. My nurse from my doctor's office was in the bar, and apparently the only person I could imagine that would have outed me to the guy, but she was kind of giggling, smiling at me and stuff like that. And when we ended up getting done, I turned the guy down. I walked out, and as I walked out, he followed me to my car and called me a faggot and threw me against my car and choked me out until I almost blacked out, because he was upset that he hit on me in front of some of his friends. Again, when we talk about why people mistrust healthcare providers or situations, since then, for approximately 10 years through my healthcare, through multiple doctors, I would lie about my period. I would just say, oh yeah, I had it on the 2nd. Oh, it was a very heavy flow, just because I didn't want to deal with the fact that I had to out myself to my own doctor. And then when we think about, how can you really have good medical health care, right? If you're so afraid to tell your doctor that you're a trans person because you're going to potentially be outed or be mistreated in your doctor's office, that often will lead to obviously additional healthcare issues longer term, because you're not wanting to go see the doctor as often or be honest while you're at your doctor's office. Higher rates of multiple healthcare issues and HIV diagnoses. When you think about the total amount of women in America that have HIV, 14% of those women are trans women, and that's a significantly higher ratio than cisgender women. Looks like Layla raised a hand. And
Yes, there's just a question in the chat. Sam is saying that they're on the executive board for Oglethorpe's outlet organization. So what would be the best way to reach out to homeless TGNC folk in the Atlanta area?
I'm going to give you guys a whole amazing few different organizations at the end that I work with, and I would love for you guys to volunteer, reach out, donate. It's going to be a whole slide, and you guys can take a picture at the end. That way you guys have some of the organizations. My understanding was, I believe, where was that? 14%, yes, roughly, of trans women in the U.S. have were the portion of women that were diagnosed, or the portion of the percentage of people diagnosed with HIV in 2018, which is significantly higher than the cisgender rate. So Black trans women, when we think about every single thing on every single issue we can have, whether it's homelessness, whether it is HIV, healthcare issues, employment issues, Black trans women are the most marginalized community in America in every single way. So when we talk about lifting up community, if we lift up Black trans women, then we also lift up every other minority and marginalized community. So it's a great way of thinking about it, which is why we have the specific hashtag Black Trans Lives Matter. So since coming out, again, and I often believe, I believe May had asked a question about it being your salient identity, but I also feel like we often come out every day in a weird way. So I always say coming out again, but to me, oftentimes, sometimes we're coming out every single day. When I came out, I ended up helping found Asian Q&A, which at the time was called Queer and Adolescent, but it's a organization that is geared towards being Asian and queer in the Atlanta area. It's for, teenage folk all the way through college age people, provides community and spaces, social gatherings, social and racial justice conversations. Really great organization. They are on Instagram. You can find them there. PFLAG, I was a moderator for their groups in Johns Creek and Sandy Springs, or a facilitator, I'll say, not a moderator. For those of you who may not know, PFLAG is a group that's usually geared towards the parents of gay and lesbian and trans people. It's a great way to get your parents or other people's parents to have conversations about how they feel being the parents of queer or LGBTQ kids. Those two particular organizations, the Johns Creek and Sandy Springs organizations, are the first ones in the actual country to have youth groups where kids can meet and talk about issues. And the one in Johns Creek was something like 65% trans. So if you guys ever run across, if you have younger siblings who are queer or TGNC, or you hear of any other kids out in the Atlanta area who are struggling with being TGNC, refer them to the Johns Creek PFLAG group. It's a really great place for kids to meet and talk. One of the best things about being in that space for me was being kind of like a queer elder and having the opportunity to talk to young trans kids. And one of the interesting things about it was how parents looked at me and could see that their kids were going to be okay later in life. We had a couple of Asian and South Asian parents in there who, as anybody in here who's DC knows, judged life purely based on whether you become a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. So seeing me being a multi-million-dollar producer and successful in my life as a trans woman was really, really eye-opening for them. And they knew their kids could also be successful. So that was a really cool experience there. These are the current boards I'm sitting on now. I sit on the LGBTQ Advisory Board to Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. I am the co-chair for the Trans Affairs Committee. We advise the mayor's office on all things TGNC. We are currently working in two sectors, as I mentioned earlier, employment and in housing, to try to change some of the narrative of what our TGNC community is going through. Some of the more specific actions we're working on is there's an employment fair coming up for the city of Atlanta sometime in summer. The date has not been chosen, but making sure that that's TGNC focused, that all the companies that are coming in are doing training on the front end of what it looks like to hire TGNC folk, and then support them in their workplace. Additionally, in the housing sectors, we're talking to the mayor's office currently about sending out a white paper memo regarding trans discrimination we're facing in homeless shelters. It's an issue across the country, but more specifically in the Atlanta area, it's one of the issues we're really grappling with in community right now. DesiQ Diaspora is another current board I sit on. If you don't know what the word Desi is, it just pretty much means of Indian descent or Pakistani descent, Bengali descent, just that general area, South Asian descent. That particular board, we were trying to do a conference last year, 2020, canceled our conference due to COVID. But it is all about finding community and a supportive space for people of that diaspora. Trans Housing Coalition is another current board that I'm sitting on. This is one of the questions I think I had a little bit earlier about how you can support trans folks. The Trans Housing Coalition came about, if you guys don't follow her or don't know her, Jessie Pratt Lopez is the founder of Trans Housing Coalition. Amazing story. About a year and a half ago, she took all these really great photographs of Black trans women who were homeless in the Atlanta area and did a fundraiser on GoFundMe. And she was asking for something like, I think $12,000 or $15,000 to try to house these people in emergency housing just for a few months to get them off the street. Well, she made the money and then she pulled out the account. The account was emptied out, and then it got picked up by some celebrity on Instagram, and I can't remember who the initial celebrity was, but once one celebrity shared it, then other celebrities started sharing the GoFundMe, and then it went viral on Twitter. And this was after the kind of BLM protests we were seeing and other things that were going on during the summer, and it ended up raising $3 million for the trans community in Atlanta. We've never had that kind of money, so it was an amazing, amazing experience. I'm sitting on that board. We're currently housing 30 people in, I think 20 people in long-term housing in apartments. I think 10 people in emergency housing, and it's not public news yet, but you guys are getting the whole scoop. We just bought our first brick and mortar house for trans people inside the perimeter of Atlanta. I was the broker and advisory person on the housing side of it. We're just super, super excited. We can house 5 people in that particular house. And it's the first time we've ever owned a house inside the perimeter as far as trans folks are concerned. And then as of last week, I joined the LGBTQ Plus Real Estate Alliance. I do a lot of advocacy and activism work, and I speak in all sorts of different spaces, but I have never allowed my work to kind of bleed into that. And I think that's probably because when I was younger, I just kept so much of it separate that I didn't really think about combining those two. But this particular board works with the National Association of Realtors, who has millions, if not billions, in lobbying power, and is a really great organization for me to start working in spaces that are going to allow me to bring up TGNC concerns in housing on a national platform. So this is the national board that I just got voted onto last week. As I mentioned earlier, I was AID Atlanta Ambassador in 2018, Grand Marshal for Pride in 2019. I also got to do some really cool stuff, like I got to be on stage with Wanda Sykes and Tig Notaro last year, which was really, really amazing. And that kind of covers some of the things that I've done since coming out. I think I had a question somewhere in here and I can't see the chat when I am in full screen share. So Layla, was there another question or?
Sorry, no, I was just sharing the website for the Trans Housing Coalition.
Awesome, and I have it, I think, on one of the upcoming slides as well, just so you guys can take some photos. So I'm going to talk a little bit about political advocacy, because the vast majority of our conversation today has been about me, my identity, coming out, and everything else. I've always been a political activist, even prior to coming back out the second time. One of the ways I most often did political advocacy was to go do line warming. If you guys are not familiar with what line warming is, it's when you go and provide people food or water when they're waiting in line, which is sadly enough not something we should have to do in the state of Georgia, but our lines end up being 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, and yes, 12 hours this last year in the November election in Marietta. So yes, a 12-hour line where people fainted. Now this is illegal, just so you guys know, if you guys are not paying attention to some of the things that are going on with our voting rights in the last 20 days, we can no longer line warm. Ways to get active in the next upcoming election in 2022 would be to get involved directly with campaigns. So we know for a fact that Warnock will be running again. That way they can stagger the 2 Senate seats out, which kind of sucks because we just won point blank in this last election, and now 2 years ago, he'll have to run again. Stacey Abrams will likely run for governor. Woohoo! So if you guys want, get involved in that campaign. It's one of the campaigns that really made me become more politically active. You can reach out to the New Georgia Project or Fair Fight. Both of those are Black women-led organizations. Really great to get involved there. They can help you with canvassing, letter writing, postcards, any number of amazing political spaces that you guys can get active in. DPG, Democratic Party of Georgia, is one of the organizations I worked with very intensely this last go around. Did the same thing, canvassing, postcards, door knocking, and then GRIT, which is an organization I started working with last year, is Georgians for Registrations and Increased Turnout. And I did quite a bit of voter registration with that particular organization, probably 4 to 5 events a week coming into the runoff election. You can also do protests. Currently, if you guys are watching what's happening down at the Capitol, we're on day 20 of protests at the Capitol. I think they're starting around noon usually. If you guys want more info on that again too, you can reach out to me. But for the current rollback in voting rights, that is what's been happening. And if you guys are not familiar with what protesting can do, just this last section of 20 days of protesting has put immense pressure on companies like Coca-Cola and Home Depot and other companies to talk about how these bills are like the new Jim Crow, and really stepping out into political spaces and saying they're not going to donate to people who put the bill forward. And it's putting pressure on the GOP in Georgia to pull out some of these voting measures. We'll see what happens, but the more companies that come on to that, the more likely it is we're going to see some change there. Okay. Some of the local trans organizations that we have that you guys can volunteer with. The one that I'm on the board for, like I was saying, Trans Housing Coalition. Here's the website if you want to take a picture of that. Transcending Barriers. They're an amazing Black woman trans-led organization that works in spaces where people are coming back out of incarceration and putting those people back into society in a positive and supported way. So helping them find jobs, helping people get their history cleared up, helping with legal documents, housing and employment. So many different avenues that particular organization works in. And then Trans Housing Atlanta program is another housing program in Atlanta that does mostly emergency housing currently. And I believe they have something like 20 people emergency housed right now as well. And it's an amazing organization that you can work with. And I believe their board consists of at least 3 or 4, again, Black trans women as well. So really, really great organizations. I am leaving roughly about 20 minutes for questions because I always have questions at the end of any of my presentations. I would love for you guys to start popping some into the chat so that we can start having some conversations about what you guys want to know. My understanding was that Layla put this in front of the core group, and I was selected by some of the students as an activist that you guys wanted to speak to. And often when I'm going through some of the things, I don't leave enough time for questions. So I tried to keep it a little bit shorter today. And that way I have enough time to answer some of y'all's questions.
Thank you, Feroza.
Absolutely.
All right,
So
questions.
I am on the executive board for Oglethorpe's Outlet, LGBT organization. What would be the best way for us to reach out to homeless TGNC folk in the Atlanta area? So more specifically than reaching out to the trans folk themselves, I would love for you guys to work with Trans Housing Coalition in the Atlanta area. We definitely need fundraising. Often we have things where we need help moving girls into spaces, moving girls out of spaces. If there's volunteer calls, we could always use belongings, furniture donations, clothing donations for the girls, silverware, plates, the most basic things that, you wouldn't often think about. Trans Housing Coalition often has those needs. So that would be great.
So
Layla?
I have a question about visibility. I'm assuming that visibility is a big step in getting trans people their rights, right? And so how does social media play into it? You spoke about it a little bit. Have we seen any movement forward? You said that in the past 4 years or so, there's been actually a downward trend in terms of violence against the TGNC community. Are we seeing any movement forward?
Yes, we're seeing lots of movement forward. So if you guys are all familiar, I don't know if you guys watch the TV show Pose, which had, I believe, 6 trans women of color in it, representing themselves and community. Amazing. If you guys haven't seen it, please watch it. I don't know if you guys saw the special called Disclosure that was done by Laverne Cox and talked about trans representation in media. I have 3 friends, I think, that were in that documentary. Really amazing to watch because you're really seeing how much we're coming forward in certain community. With increased visibility, we also see increased violence, right? And we see increased pushback. I often feel like before any great movement or leap forward, we also see some repression, right? So I'm hoping that these next 4 years and 8 years after this kind of repressive administration are one in which we really grow and see TGNC communities and communities of color really kind of bounce forward. That's at least my hope when I think about the last 4 years. But yeah, there's lots of spaces that we're also growing in. It seems like overwhelmingly society is becoming more TGNC accepting and that people are becoming more and more understanding of what it's like. One of the really cool stats for me in Atlanta, Layla, is that when we did our survey in Atlanta and surveyed the local Atlanta community, that 30% of the people surveyed in the whole TGNC community in Atlanta identified as non-binary or gender fluid. So as somebody who's elder in this community, or somebody who is binary trans, which I represent myself as a woman and I see myself as a woman, it was a really amazing thing to see so many people who were non-conforming or gender fluid and identified in that way, which to me and a lot of the age group that did identify that way was younger. So it was really great to see so many people kind of change or come out, in a sense, talking about how they identified, and to see such a vast difference between how I think the numbers were, just 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and 15 years ago versus now. What changes to sex education need to be made to include TGNC people? How can doctors or OBGYNs be more accepting and helpful to trans people? Whew. Sex education, Lord Almighty. We do live in Georgia. And if I'm not mistaken, and again, you guys are the educators here, maybe Sarah or Linda can correct me here, but if I'm not mistaken, I think 2 years ago, I was working with an activist who was still working, excuse me, in the Atlanta area to try to not push the abstinence kind of portion of sex education in Georgia. So when we look at sex education, even probably on a national level, I would assume that we are failing our students in Georgia high schools already, just based on regular cisgender heterosexual sex. We're not even talking about the spectrum and the beauty of sexuality or trans people. So that in and of itself, I think, is an issue. But I think that, yeah, talking about safe sex and more specifically for me, I think it would be talking about safe methods to come out for trans people. A lot of the violence that we see is often upon disclosure for a lot of TGNC women. As a younger trans person, I never really knew how much danger I was putting myself in when I was alone with a man disclosing, or not in a well-lit location, or not around other people. So often I put myself in dangerous situations that didn't need to be. I think openly talking about LGBTQ people in sex education, talking about different ways to protect yourself with anal sex, oral sex, other things like that. They're more specific to our communities. How can doctors or GYNs be more accepting and helpful to TGNC people? After my bottom surgery, which I had in 2011, I think it was, I went to a OBGYN here, and it was a very uncomfortable situation because she had never met or worked with another trans woman post-op, and her bedside manner was a little cold. So I think that some of the things that apply to healthcare providers in general, when we talk about TGNC people, it's really important for more specifically doctors who are dealing with your intimacy and private parts to be a little bit more cautious about how they're dealing with trans women and men, because we're already shaken just going in to see a regular doctor. As I mentioned, that was just my primary care physician nurse that outed me, much less when I'm in stirrups with a gynecologist. So I never went back and saw her. I haven't seen an obstetrician or a gynecologist in 7 years. So I don't really kind of know. I see my new primary care physician who's LGBTQ friendly. And they do all of my kind of regular checkups and all that kind of good stuff. But it is kind of scary to think that as an activist and an advocate who's sitting here talking to you guys about some of our own needs, that I can sit here and admit that I haven't seen an OBGYN in, probably 7 or 8 years. It's a little scary. But yeah, those are some of the things that I think we could do. Maybe just normalizing gender identity and sexuality spectrum. Yes, that would be great. I think one of the biggest issues we often see currently in the trans community is people who identify as binary trans not being accepting of gender non-conforming or non-binaries or NBs, as people say. And I think that just getting rid of binary gender would be great, because it really doesn't help anybody, and it really doesn't hurt anybody to not have that in place. If people want to wear boys' clothes, wear boys' clothes. If you want to wear girls' clothes, wear girls' clothes. If you want to present one kind of way, present one kind of way. What harm is that doing to anybody in any way, shape, or form? None. So why do we have to have all these hangups on where people want to be, or what their pronouns are, or what they want to be called? So just treat people with respect. What can we do to support TGNC people? What can we avoid doing to support TGNC people? TGNC people, to support TGNC people, definitely speak up and out when you're seeing transphobia. Similar to other marginalized communities, it often falls on the trans people, more specifically trans people of color, to go out and humanize ourselves, to constantly have these conversations, to be doing panels, to try to talk to people on a day in, day out basis. So just like any other marginalized communities, having allies come out in support of us, speaking out for us, is really, really important, just like you would do with, Black Lives, or, stopping Asian hate this last week with the attacks that we had in Atlanta. Solidarity from white women and white men and communities that are not necessarily as marginalized is extremely important, and seeing those allies. What can we avoid doing to support TGNC people? So let's talk about a couple of like things that are not appropriate. Not talking to people about their surgeries, although I outed, myself, and when I've had surgeries here, this isn't an educational kind of conversation. You never want to walk up to somebody who is trans and A, ask them if they are trans, or B, when somebody's trans, have conversations about their private parts. It's not something you do with cisgendered people, so please don't walk up to somebody who's trans and talk about surgeries. That's just absolutely a no-go. I think that, often I find that some people will walk up to someone who's trans and, say, oh, hi, my name, what are your pronouns, to try to be kind, right? And ask, but rather than doing that, if you were to introduce yourself and just say, hi, my name is Layla, and my pronouns are she, her, what are yours, to everybody you talk to, it would be so much easier, because then the trans person that you may not know what their pronouns are doesn't feel like they're kind of targeted in a sense where you're going up to them. So I often ask my educators to do that at the beginning of class every semester, is just start off with, hi, I'm your teacher, Sarah Terry, my pronouns are she, her. Can we go through and everybody in the class talk about what their pronouns are and how they want to be identified, rather than doing it, where you're picking one person up. How do we, go ahead.
This talks about positionality statements. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just learned about that a few months ago. I was so happy to learn about it, and I'm trying to sort of incorporate them in my. So it's like every day, something that helps us all connect better, right? Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I found that that's one thing that educators often come back and say, oh my God, this has been so helpful, because people really feel like, they can come out and be safe and talk about their identity or who they are as a person when I start off my class in this way. How do we battle transphobia within the LGBTQ community? This is a difficult one, guys, because, hurt people is a very common statement that we hear in marginalized communities. But within the LGBTQ community, we have so many issues that are happening, whether that's kind of racial issues, xenophobia against Asian folks, transphobia against our community. I think that within the community, we need to have deeper conversations about the trans community being left behind. So when we talk about HRC, for example, if anybody's familiar with Human Rights Campaign, Human Rights Campaign is the largest lobbying organization in the country for LGBTQ folks. But what some people may not know is back when, I think it was in the 1990s that, sorry, not 1990s, during Obama's administration, when they were trying to pass legislation against hate crimes, they dropped the trans section out, HRC did, because they believed it would become a more passable bill. And so within our own community, there was this organization that's the pillar of LGBTQ lobbying, literally slicing out trans folks. Now HRC has come full circle. I don't know if you guys know, but the new president, Alfonso David, has really made an attempt to incorporate trans folks. One of my good girlfriends, Tori Cooper, works in the Human Rights Campaign's office in DC as their trans coordinator. And they have all these amazing programs that are going back out. But what we're seeing is as trans people have become more visible, as transphobia has become more of an issue within our community, that the community is starting to step up a little bit more and kind of correct some of those older mistakes. But I think just continued visibility, talking about things and making sure that the people that are in the LGBTQ community, for example, white, cis, gay men, also understand that they sit in a space of privilege, in relationship to Black, gay, cis men or trans Black women, for example, and making sure that we're holding our own community accountable. When discussing Black trans lives matter, some feel it takes away from the main issues of BLM, such as police brutality, which should already include all Black lives. What can we do as activists to educate others on the importance of intersectionality within marginalized communities? I do see this statement a lot more, Jocelyn, I think within organizing groups when we're talking about, Asian folks or other marginalized communities. But when it comes to Black trans lives or Black trans women, I feel like it still really, really is relevant to the main issues of what Black Lives Matter are. And it's crazy because Black trans women, as I mentioned earlier, are the most marginalized community in the United States of America. So by lifting them up, we are lifting everybody up. I think that, intersections matter because every intersection you add on can often make you more marginalized. And, a Black trans woman is definitely more disenfranchised and more marginalized than a Black cis woman, in my experience. And I think that that's why that particular hashtag matters so much. I think what we can do to educate people is really talk about some of the things that I've talked about, some of the numbers when we talk about, in comparison, homelessness, HIV, healthcare disparities, and when people are trying to not marginalize, but trying to say that this particular community doesn't represent, all folks. Yes, but what is this particular community going through? Any thoughts on the current debate on trans inclusion in sports? I think our conversation was very enlightening to me. Oh, Lord, this is a tough one. So I am a firm believer that trans people should be able to play whatever sports that they want, and be able to play in in any age group, even sports that they want. The scientific basis currently showing that 1.5 to 2 years on any kind of hormone therapy, if you were past a high school age, shows that 1.5 to 2 years on hormone therapy takes away any kind of physical advantage that you would have in the trans community. But let's be very clear here. We don't have any trans, Serena Williams or, LeBron James or things like that. And we can go back to multiple different organizations that have allowed TGNC folks into those organizations, like the Olympics, right? Has allowed it, I think, for over a decade plus. Do you guys know of any crazy trans people who have been winning everything and just hitting records? No, right? I think the WNBA did. I believe the NBA did. So that being said, when we're looking at our trans athletes, you would assume if a trans person had this crazy advantage that we would be, at the top of our game in women's track and field, or be, our Olympic team would have at least 1 or 2 TGNC folks on it, right? And we don't. So there's really no truth to the basis that trans people have an insane advantage. When you look at some of the articles that are shared on social media that say, cisgender woman beat by a trans person, I beg you to go and look up that person and see if on the next match the trans person was beat by the cis person, because, probably 9 times out of 10, it was just a fluke win. And then the next go around, the cisgendered person ended up beating the trans person. One of the things I will say, being fair here, is if you were super concerned about this issue, perhaps you should lobby for trans people to be counted in the census so that we know what the true numbers are and stats on TGNC folks, and see if we can have more data. As a woman, a trans woman of color, it's frightening to me to this very day to kind of look at the lack of data that we have in healthcare and in sports, and pretty much every aspect or every statistic that we could measure. TGNC folks' numbers are lacking. So we really don't know enough in many cases to prove without a shadow of a doubt, one way or another, what's happening. And that's because we are not counted as people. Sorry, I think that was the last question. Any other questions, guys? And I hope I did a decent job of answering your questions. So if you guys want, and you guys are on Instagram or on Facebook, you can follow me. It's my first name and my last name, Feroza Syed, on Facebook. And on Twitter, it's Feroza Syed1, although I don't really use Twitter that much. And on Instagram, it's Feroza Syed ATL. if there are questions that you guys have about things, you can just private message me if you didn't want to ask them in a public setting with other staff and students. I try to answer every question I get on social media. And you can always reach out to Layla for my personal contact information. If there's anybody that you know that's struggling or needs help or access to different organizations.
Thank you, Feroza. I was just wanting to mention in chat that we will see you again on April 2nd.
Yeah.
And so anyone who has a friend or roommate or is interested in showing up for this sort of more intimate conversation, please do. It's also going to be advertised um, in different ways. It's online, and I just put it on chat.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk to you guys all today and to all you students. I am not the end all be all on any of these matters. I am just a person. I never planned on being an activist. It just happened. And I think that we all have that ability. I just know that when I came out and I had 5 minutes of fame, I wanted to use that 5 minutes of fame to help my community further, you know, what we need. And in a sense, that's what I've been doing for the last 3 years. So I'm happy that I got the opportunity to talk to you and that Layla reached out. And I look forward to seeing some of you guys on April 2nd.
Thank you so much, Feroza.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.